For years, my Navy patrol boat sat proudly in my driveway, gleaming under the sun, a tangible testament to my years of service, countless missions, and the pride I carried as a veteran. It wasn't merely a vessel, but a symbol of resilience, identity, and the memories of battles fought and comrades lost. Each rivet and scratch telling a story of sacrifice and dedication, a piece of history that I cherished deeply, representing more than just a machine. It was a bridge between my past and present, a constant reminder of the discipline and courage that shaped me into the person I had become. The neighborhood where I lived was quiet, orderly, and seemingly peaceful. A suburban haven where children played safely in cul-de-sacs, neighbors waved with genuine smiles, and the HOA board maintained what appeared to be a fair balance between community standards and individual freedoms. I had always respected the HOA's role, understanding that rules exist to preserve harmony, but I also believed that those rules should not stifle personal expression or strip away the pride one rightfully owns. Yet beneath this calm surface lurked a brewing storm that no one saw coming until it was too late. One clear afternoon, as I returned home from a long day, I noticed something that stopped me dead in my tracks. Vivid, harsh streaks of spray. Paint marred the smooth, polished hull of my beloved patrol boat, scrawled with hateful words and crude symbols that made my stomach churn with shock and disbelief. It was not random graffiti or an unfortunate accident. It was a deliberate act of vandalism, an affront to everything I held dear, and the perpetrator was no stranger but someone I had known within the neighborhood, the notorious Karen Jenkins, the HOA president, a woman infamous for her inflexible rules, her intolerance of anything that deviated from her narrow vision of community standards, and a readiness to wield her authority with an iron fist, crushing dissent and difference without remorse. The shock of seeing my cherished possession desecrated by the very person who was supposed to help govern the neighborhood was overwhelming, and anger mingled with a deep sadness as I tried to comprehend why anyone would go so far, not just to punish me, but to attack a symbol of my identity and sacrifice so viciously. When I confronted Karen, expecting at least a shred of remorse or a reason for such cruelty, I was met instead with cold, unapologetic hostility. She dismissed my pain and outrage as though it was irrelevant, twisting the narrative to accuse me of violating HOA codes by having a military-style vehicle on display, a claim so absurd it made my blood boil. This confrontation wasn't just a personal attack, it was a warning, a clear message that the HOA's power could be abused to intimidate and silence those who dared to stand out or hold on to their heritage. The neighbors, once friendly and supportive, seemed divided, some fearful to speak up, others uncertain about the truth behind Karen's actions. As the days passed, the tension in the community grew thick, the atmosphere charged with unease, and whispered conversations about fairness, justice, and the abuse of power. I found myself at a crossroads. Would I let this injustice slide, or would I stand my ground, fight for my rights, and reclaim not only my patrol boat, but my dignity and the respect I deserved? The damage to the boat was repairable, but the damage to trust and harmony felt much deeper. This was the beginning of a battle I never anticipated, one that would test my resilience far beyond anything I had faced in service, forcing me to confront a bureaucracy more insidious than any enemy on the battlefield, all while holding on to the memory of who I was and what I stood for. Not only had Karen vandalized my boat with malicious spray paint, but in an almost surreal twist of injustice, she turned around and accused me of violating the HOA's so-called aesthetic guidelines and community standards, as if the very existence of my Navy patrol boat in my own driveway was a crime against neighborhood harmony and decency. The irony was suffocating, and I was stunned beyond words. The very person who had defaced my property was now playing the victim, claiming that I was the one responsible for disrupting the peace and violating rules that were apparently designed to control every inch of how residents expressed themselves outside their homes. What followed was a rapid escalation of hostility and absurdity that felt like something out of a nightmare. Karen called an emergency HOA board meeting with a haste that reeked of premeditation and bias, an obvious power play to intimidate me and set an example for anyone else who might consider defying her rigid vision of conformity. During this meeting, which was anything but fair or open-minded, Karen aggressively pushed for the harshest possible penalty, a staggering $250,000 fine for harboring a military-style vessel that supposedly clashed with the community's aesthetic and violated vague, selectively enforced rules that no one else seemed to have a problem with until it was convenient. I sat there trying to keep my composure, as the board listened with cold indifference, their faces blank, or worse, smug, seemingly ready to rubber-stamp the punitive fine without hearing the full story or acknowledging the blatant vandalism I had suffered at Karen's own hands. I desperately tried to reason with them, explaining the boat's significance, how it was a symbol of my service and sacrifice, not an eyesore or threat. But my words seemed to bounce off a wall of willful ignorance and prejudice, as though the entire board had already made up their minds and were only waiting for the official nod to crush me financially and emotionally. The fine was more than a penalty. It was a calculated effort to break me, to force me to remove my boat and erase a visible piece of my identity, to silence me through intimidation and financial ruin. The outrage I felt was almost unbearable. I was the victim of a cruel, twisted injustice, and yet the people entrusted with fairness and community well-being had turned into oppressors, wielding their authority like weapons against one of their own. The neighborhood that once felt like home now seemed hostile and alien, filled with whispered gossip, veiled threats, and neighbors who either supported Karen's vendetta or dared not speak out for fear of becoming targets themselves. The board's stance was clear: conformity at any cost, obedience without question, and punishment for anyone who dared to stand apart. I realized then that this wasn't just about a boat. It was about control, about power, and about the frightening ease with which authority can be abused when checks and balances fail. The weight of the situation settled heavily on my shoulders, but it also ignited a fierce determination within me not to back down, not to let this injustice define me or dictate my future. Every day brought new challenges, legal threats, letters from the HOA's lawyers filled with jargon and ultimatums, and a relentless pressure designed to wear me down and isolate me. But I clung to the truth, to my community of supporters who believed in fairness, and to the memories of what that boat represented. The fight ahead would be long and difficult, but surrender was never an option. I had to protect not only my property, but also my dignity and the principle that no one, no matter their title or position, has the right to destroy what someone else holds sacred. The chapter closed on a bitter note, with the $250,000 fine hanging over me like a sword of Damocles, a stark reminder of the lengths to which some would go to enforce conformity and crush individuality. But it also marked the beginning of a battle that would test every ounce of my resolve and courage. Determined not to let injustice win or allow my identity and property to be trampled under the boot of a petty HOA president and a biased board, I began the arduous process of rallying support within my community, seeking out neighbors who quietly shared my frustration and dismay, but had feared standing up against Karen's tyranny, gathering testimonies from those who had witnessed her overreach and abuses of power in smaller, less visible ways, documenting every detail of the vandalism inflicted on my Navy patrol boat with painstaking care, photographing the spray paint, scars, collecting eyewitness statements, and securing copies of HOA meeting minutes that revealed the twisted logic behind their accusations and the unprecedented $250,000 fine they levied against me. This evidence became the backbone of a mounting case that began to attract attention beyond our sleepy neighborhood, as I reached out to legal experts with experience in property rights and HOA disputes, as well as veterans organizations who understood the symbolic importance of my boat and the broader implications of this fight, framing it not just as a property dispute, but as a matter of respect for those who have served and sacrificed. What started as a personal grievance quickly morphed into a public cause as local news outlets picked up the story, intrigued by the David versus Goliath narrative of a Navy veteran standing up against an authoritarian HOA president, dubbed HOA Karen by an increasingly engaged online audience, whose spray paint vandalism and harsh fine embodied the worst fears about small-town governance run amok. Social media exploded with shares, comments, and calls for justice, turning my fight into a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny and unchecked authority, galvanizing support from veterans, civil rights advocates, and everyday citizens who saw in my struggle a reflection of their own battles against oppressive rules and unjust treatment. Fueled by this wave of solidarity, I found renewed strength and purpose, refusing to pay the outrageous fine that was designed to break me financially and emotionally, instead channeling my energy into preparing for a courtroom battle that promised to be long, grueling, and pivotal, not only for my case but for anyone who values their rights against overbearing homeowners associations. I worked tirelessly with attorneys, reviewing every clause in the HOA's bylaws, strategizing on how to expose Karen's vandalism and the board's biased enforcement of their vague, aesthetic rules, all while managing the emotional toll of living under constant threat of financial ruin and social ostracism within my own neighborhood. Throughout this ordeal, the unwavering support of my neighbors and the wider community became a lifeline, reminding me that this fight transcended a single patrol boat or an inflated fine. It was about standing up for fundamental principles of fairness, dignity, and respect, about pushing back when those in power attempt to silence and punish individuals for asserting their identity and rights. Every step forward was met with new challenges and setbacks, but my resolve hardened as I realized that victory here would send a powerful message that no one, not even an HOA president wielding her position like a weapon, could trample on the rights of those who refused to bow to injustice. Making this more than a legal battle, it was a stand for community, honor, and the courage to fight when the odds are stacked against you. The day of the courtroom battle arrived with a tension so thick it felt like the very air was holding its breath. As I walked into the packed courtroom where neighbors, supporters, reporters, and legal experts gathered to witness the clash between an individual standing up for justice and an HOA president abusing her power with reckless abandon. I stood firm, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and determination, knowing that this moment was more than just about me or my Navy patrol boat. It was about sending a message that tyranny and injustice, no matter how deeply embedded in local politics or community governance, would not go unchallenged. As the proceedings began, I presented my case with unwavering clarity and resolve, armed with irrefutable evidence, detailed photographs of the spray paint vandalism clearly linking Karen Jenkins to the destruction of my property, video recordings of HOA meetings revealing the biased and predetermined nature of the $250,000 fine, and testimonies from neighbors and experts who attested to the discriminatory enforcement of the HOA's vague, aesthetic guidelines, painting a damning picture of abuse of power and personal vendetta. The courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably as the judge absorbed the overwhelming facts and the blatant duplicity of Karen's actions. Her role as HOA president, no shield against the clear and cold evidence that she had willfully vandalized my property, and then weaponized her authority to impose a punitive and unjust fine in an attempt to intimidate and silence me. Throughout the intense deliberations, I remained steadfast, knowing that every detail I had meticulously gathered was crucial in dismantling the HOA's case and exposing the corrosive influence of unchecked power. While outside the courtroom, community members and supporters awaited the outcome, their faith in justice and fairness hanging in the balance. After what felt like an eternity, the judge delivered a ruling that echoed far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The $250,000 fine was overturned in its entirety, declared an unlawful and discriminatory punishment, and Karen Jenkins was ordered to pay restitution for the damage she caused to my patrol boat, a rare and powerful rebuke to her misuse of office that sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. This landmark decision not only restored my rights, but forced the HOA to confront its flawed policies, prompting a complete revision of the community's rules to prevent future abuses and ensure fairness and transparency, marking a significant victory for individual rights against oppressive governance. As I stood beside my Navy patrol boat, now proud, pristine, and untouched once more, the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief and reckoning. A hard lesson in justice and respect had been learned, and a new chapter of community, spirit, and accountability had begun. This was not merely a personal triumph, but a beacon of hope and resilience for anyone who has ever been bullied, silenced, or marginalized, proving that standing firm in the face of injustice can inspire change and reaffirm the principles of fairness and dignity that bind us all together.